Welcome to our presentation of Antigua, slave revolts and conspiracies. This is the site of the main house on the largest plantation in Antigua. Now, regarding early revolts in Antigua, slave resistance also occurred on Antigua. In the 17th century, before the island was properly settled, runaways formed what were known as maroon societies or villages that were made up of escaped slaves who concealed themselves in the wild interior around the summit of Antigua's extinct volcano, Boggy Peak. English justice was harsh back then. When the Maroons were recaptured in a roundup that was ordered in 1687, one slave found guilty of what they referred to as mutinous behavior was sentenced to be burned to ashes, and another, who carried messages, had a leg sawed off. This treatment was not sufficient to dissuade others. In a 1736 report on the revolt, it was reported that the conspirators were encouraged by being exposed to entertainment and dance and frivolity. The plan was to gather 300 or 400 slaves and attack the whites. This plot was uncovered and the conspirators were executed. The conspiracy allegedly involved slaves on a number of large plantations and was built around audacious efforts to destroy the island's planters in a singular, spectacular explosion. So, taking advantage of a large ball due to be held in St. John's in October of 1736, the slaves planned to smuggle a 10-gallon barrel of gunpowder into the building and blow it up. The detonation was to be the signal for slaves on the surrounding plantations to rise, murder their masters, and march on the capital from 4 directions. A general massacre would follow the explosion, and Prince Klaas himself would be enthroned as leader of a new black kingdom on that island. It was at a ceremony of this sort, pictured here, that Prince Klaas was acclaimed as king of the Antiguan slaves, at which, according to some historians, he declared war on the island's planters in a formal Ashanti ritual. One slave gave sufficient details under interrogation and occasionally torture. 132 were convicted of participating. 32 slaves confessed to having some stake in the scheme. And of this number, 5, including Prince Klaas, were broken on the wheel. We'll talk about the wheel a little bit later. 6 were gibbeted. That means hung in irons until they died from hunger and thirst. And 77 others were burned at the stake. Now, this is a picture of punishment on the wheel. This is the execution of Prince Klaas, who was executed along with 87 others. Now, breaking on the wheel was the most horrific punishment ever inflicted upon our ancestors. It was a form of crucifixion, but with several cruel refinements. In its evolved form, a prisoner was strapped on the wheel, spread-eagled, to a large cartwheel that was placed axle first in the earth so that it formed a rotating platform a few feet above the ground. The wheel was then slowly rotated while an executioner methodically crushed the bones of the condemned man's body, starting with his fingers, and then his toes, and then working inward. An experienced headsman would take pride in ensuring that his victim remained conscious. I don't want you to pass out throughout this procedure. And when his work was done, then the wheel is hoisted upright and fixed in the soil, leaving the condemned person to hang there until he died from shock and internal bleeding, which could take anywhere from a few hours up to a few days. And this is a picture that was from the Betty Hope plantation in 1910, after slavery was abolished. But many of the conditions remained the same, particularly under what was referred to as apprenticeship. Please know that apprenticeship was a precursor of what would become Reconstruction in the United States. So under apprenticeship, this is where newly freed slaves had to work for free in order to compensate their former masters for their so-called loss.